Hello everyone, today we read and comment the 37th paragraph of the second chapter of the second book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege, the title being Strategy deduces only from experience the ends and means to be examined. The text follows. The first question is, how does strategy arrive at a complete list of these things? If there is to be a philosophical inquiry leading to an absolute result, it would become entangled in all those difficulties which the logical necessity of the conduct of war and its theory exclude. It therefore turns to experience and directs its attention on those combinations which military history can furnish. In this manner, no doubt, nothing more than a limited theory can be obtained, which only suits circumstances such as are presented in history. But this incompleteness is unavoidable, because in any case theory must either have deduced from or have compared with history what it advances with respect to things. Besides, this incompleteness in every case is more theoretical than real. One great advantage of this method is that theory cannot lose itself in abstruse disquisitions, subtleties, and chimeras, but must always remain practical. So, very important paragraph that introduces the importance of historical inquiry for the definition of the theory of the art of war, therefore encompassing not just strategy but also tactics. And that has a remarkable methodological impact, naturally, in the way we can see, and that offers the most concrete view, I would say, of the effectiveness of such method that von Clausewitz is pointing out, right? So in here we are essentially dismantling step by step the concept of a positive theory of the art of war, as we have defined it in some up to a certain paragraph ago, and which emphasizes the most concrete value of experience when it gets down to determining, in fact, the theory of the art of war, and therefore how this theory can be useful and effectively applicable, always bearing in mind that, as this same paragraph has just stated, this theory is gonna remain incomplete, right? Albeit this incompleteness is partial, right? It's more theoretical than real, as von Clausewitz puts it, and now we observe why. So, first of all, the title, Strategy deduces only from experience the ends and means to be examined. Right, so in the previous paragraph we actually in previous paragraphs from the 34th, but also more from the 30th, we have defined how end and means fundamentally are modeled in strategy or in tactics. It's really part of the same thing, bearing in mind that tactics is a mean of strategy. Right, and it's always defined by it in a certain way, and vice versa, right? But with strategy having, let's say, the upper hand. So here, reading the text, the first question is, how does strategy arrive at a complete list of these things, right? So the question would be, still, but can we draw essentially a perfect theory from this? The answer is obviously not. There is not a complete list. And in fact, von Clausewitz says, if there is to be a philosophical inquiry leading to an absolute result, it would become entangled in all those difficulties which the logical necessity of the conduct of war and its theory exclude, right? And we have basically read and commented the Vom Kriege for almost 1 year, essentially stating this, that we have listed all, especially in the first book, all those factors that objectively prevent the absolute knowledge of what the hell is going on. Not just in war, right? But in life in general, but especially in war, as it's defined as the most complicated of all the human activities in terms of a possible outcome. Like, it's the less predictable. It's something that has in itself such a concentration of factors that it's not, let's say, necessarily more complex than other things. I mean, obviously, the whole world is more complex than the wars that are being fought in it. But it's a strictly cognitive problem, right? In war, things happen fast, and if you really want to get to know what's going on in order to cope with it effectively, you have to accept that, cognitively speaking, you basically can't, right? You can, up to a certain point, you can rely on certain abilities, in moral as well as physical, etc. But fundamentally, you can't. You, as von Clausewitz says, constantly in war, 3/4 of what you need to know is unknown, right? And every attempt to reduce this to a positive theory that allegedly has to tell you whatever is going on would basically make you lose more time. And getting more damaged at that point than what that is necessary. Instead, if you went just there and began to rely on certain abilities and capacities that we already have, that our mind already has, without the need to follow a preordered track, especially in this context where everything is changing continuously, right? So it's obvious that you need, I don't know, that an armed force needs an intelligence, right? But this intelligence has to cope constantly. It doesn't have to get to the truth, because nobody knows the truth. But it has to get closer to it. How? Well, essentially, with a compromise with other pressing factors, such as time and how the situation is evolving on the ground, right? So that's what intelligence has to be. It has this great capacity, this great balance between analysis and synthesis to give something that can be useful at that given moment. And there is nothing that is useful enough to grant you a victory, right? And obviously this depends also on what the situation really is. But generally speaking, things can evolve in incredibly different ways, especially in war. Right, in incredibly unpredictable ways, that you can't, by definition, sort out absolutely, but not even by a wide margin. Right, we are condemned not to understand 3/4 of what we need to know in order to take action during a war. Nobody does. Right, and that's how you can't have a positive theory of the art of war. So here von Clausewitz is stating essentially this aspect that puts the matter on a strictly philosophical level, because he points out legitimately that, thanks to my eyes, he would say, everybody would like to know what is going on. But at that point, it really becomes so abstract that what is really happening can't be changed in consistent ways in a favorable direction for you, an unfavorable one towards the enemy. Then von Clausewitz goes on and says, it therefore turns to experience and directs its attention. So this is the philosophy, and directs its attention on those combinations which military history can furnish, right? So, having given up the mirage of an absolute result, you get essentially to experience. What is that we already know that can reveal a lot about the war? Well, the same history of war, what happened historically, and what effectively occurred on the battlefield. Because this is the point of history, like of research, in order to inquire in order to get something more accurate on what has actually happened. Now, in this is fascinating, because you see, history in this regard can be interpreted philosophically as well. I mean, history in itself not only doesn't have kind of scientific precision in the measure other sciences have, but it's probably not even what we intend as a subject. Like, even a physician physicist actually, but also a physician for that matter, is a historian. Every person who wants to know how things work and trying to get something useful from it is a historian, right? So military history here is meant really, and von Clausewitz stresses it in the inquiry on episodes that have actually happened, and we know that by a good degree of approximation, because there are things objectively that in history we study, but for example didn't happen, just for you to know. Like, what do you think that everything is written in history books is actually true? Well, we don't know, because sometimes even sources that state certain things maybe are, not true. They're not telling the truth, but we still revolve around them because there's nothing else, right? And that's why actual good history is written with a lot of question marks, or not literally meant, because I hate question marks in texts. But, well, not so much. Sometimes I use them myself. But, that analyzes problems for which, at that point, the solution is, by default, unknown, because we can't effectively reckon that, because we don't know the truth, as we were saying before, right? Think about every episode that, I don't know, you and another person witness in the same way. Well, already on the same way we could debate, but to make the long story short, let's make it simply that you have to write down what happened, and then think the same. So you're doing a history there, you're making a research, and then to read the two texts about what actually happened, and it would be astonishing to see the differences, the similarities, but also effectively the things that, for example, that you actually got right, but the ones you got wrong, the ones you didn't state, right? So history has actually an enormous problem and that's what we are all doing here. That's why we care about history. We care about knowing things. It's not, and that's what all the good historians should be, not thinking that we study history because we can know the truth, right? I must say many people reason like this. They think that there is like an historical truth that is unchangeable, and that basically nobody can alter, touch, and you need these hard facts for which you know that things happen in that way. Well, the closest you can get to that are historical theories that are essentially very complex systems that lead towards a certain direction, that is your thesis, and that are hopefully substantiated with something. But at that point, if it's a theory, chances are that the premises of it, by a certain degree, are flawed in some way, right? And at that point, you can naturally, and you acknowledge that, because we all do it. What do you think historians write? Like, because they think they know the truth. We don't. Nobody does, really. Not even scientists know the truth. No, nobody does. By definition, we don't know whether even we exist or not. Literally. I mean, I'm not kidding. We have everything also in terms of mathematics, physics. It's about, something that for now works for what surrounds us, but it's still an approximation. We don't know whether this is truth or something else, right? But it still works, and it works pretty damn well for us, and therefore we use it. But the presumption of the truth, we leave it to, in fact, people who are not actual scientists, right? But all this for saying that there is not a real difference in Clausewitzian thought, after all, between those who observe the military event and can study it at that point. Meaning what? Well, von Clausewitz is the best example in many ways in this context, because he was a military man and a military story. He was a hell of a commander. He had an important role in many, even at Waterloo. It had he fought throughout all the Napoleonic Wars. He saw. He was an eyewitness of some of the most important battles and campaigns of the time. So he actually saw certain things, but he also understood as a commander that, of course, what he saw was not enough to describe what actually happened. And that's why historians, why he cares so much. At one point, von Clausewitz will also explain what's the task of an actual historian, right? Aside from the military one, it's quite ideal one, right? Because it's the absolute, let's say, towards which we have to tend. Ideally, it is having, making statements with a solid, sound, like actually absolute certainty about the connection cause effect. Well, actually, no single historian in this earth has that certainty, because no human being has in the first place about anything that surrounds him or her. And that's why the thing gets difficult, and that's why at the same time, however, and this is astonishing, because many of you will tell, well, but then what? We can't doubt about everything. Well, why not? That's literally what we're meant for. I mean, I think it's also an ethical duty. Like, if you didn't doubt about anything, you basically would think that everything is at its own place. You can't do anything more about it. That we can't improve, we can't do, because it's already, more or less we know what we do, and we have to stop there. Science actually as such doesn't work like that. It never worked like that. Science is this continuous way of forming, of let's say, of destroying and reforming and reshaping and trying and making either hypotheses and testing theories and so on, to get always towards a more precise, a more accurate, let's say better, result, right? And this happens in history too, so that of course you can't deny that, World War II existed, because we all know it did. But how do we know, right? And it's tricky because, for example, negationists, let's say better, are that's what they do. But we don't really know, because nobody actually knows precisely. You can't arrive to deny the Holocaust in that way. That's not how history happens either, right? Because there is an evidence that is sound enough in the world, in the approximate world we live in, that gives us the needed certainty for acknowledging the event of something. And this happens just even in law, and that's actually why the historian has a great responsibility, because, for example, now I made the example of the Holocaust, but every single crime that ever happened that is studied historically, and not by a judiciary, for example, well, puts the historian in front of saying, even if you, let's say, are mistaken by one person, that's still one person that has died, right? And you have the responsibility of actually stating that. And it's very crude to say, but actually, as a society, we don't really care much, telling the truth. Like, we don't have, in sense of historical awareness and sensitivity, a great care towards things that have happened and how they have happened. It is also very sad, but at the same time makes you understand how difficult history really is. I'm actually planning now, a little digression, I'm actually planning a video to explain thoroughly how this really works from the perspective of someone who hadn't studied history yet and has studied the history at certain levels, to make you understand also how much room there is for further improvement, right? And how history is never like history is always malleable up to a certain point. Like, you can always find room for expanding and learning more and redefining, and that's why it's so fascinating, because there is not certainty, there is not an absolute value, and that's why you can tend to the limit. It's like, in sport, like there is a record, right? And everybody says, nobody can surpass that. Really? Because, like, if it's running, you can run at that speed that is, a 1 nanomillimeter faster at a second than someone else's, right? And who can at that point tell you that it's impossible? There is always, right? It's the theory of the tending towards the infinite in the logarithm, and this is real, and it's real also in history, with the interesting aspect that history is, while something can be measured physically, well, about that, if you have an actual good system of measurement and the right instruments and so on, you can actually objectify that. But with history is wholly another matter, because history is entirely devoid of a sound base, of a precise, of a scientific base, right? If not methodologically speaking, but the ground on which to stand, that's always kind of soft. And therefore, it's more important what you are able to draw, like a theory, and testing it on the base of evidence. And there is also actual logic, because people are sometimes too attached to evidence at some point that they arrive to deny something just because there is not direct evidence of it. It's like telling to Einstein's theory of relativity that it was false, and clearly wasn't actually proved fully a couple of years ago, because there was not that last proof. But the theory worked pretty well, and we knew it already. And a lot of people tend to deny, and that's also what the negationists actually work like. Like, if it's not 100%, but 99.9%, well, then I don't believe it, right? That's the thing. A healthy skepticism is probably the best weapon, surely better than healthy gullibility, I think. But there is a limit to that too, right? These are actually serious problems. And why am I making this point? I think it's still in the in topic when discussing this paragraph from the Vom Kriege, because it's really what von Clausewitz is trying to tell us, is that apparently everything can be debatable, but at the same time there is a guide, there is a path, there is a dimension that you can objectify methodologically, and that can leave you let's say, a lot of doubts for sure, but that also make you see that you on a certain ground, with a certain degree of certainty, are right on that point. And this is very, very, very interesting, because it's essentially what I'm writing these days myself on my thesis. And it's really about the point of not having the certainty, but seeing that many that there is a pattern of interpretation that fits many contexts, right? And maybe you have formulated from just one of them, but that you applicate elsewhere from other evidence is remarkably responding that same original situation you had observed before. And this is actually, in the thesis, is a strictly military thing. It's actually tactical, but not only. And it shows you how objectively we underestimate also the value of a diachronical approach to history, which is the one that the art of war actually stresses, right? Because being a military historian or a historian of the art of war are two separated things, and you can't study everything about, I don't know, a certain military aspect, but never having knowing how do you actually wage war as such, right? You can't study, I don't know, military logistics, right? You can understand something about war, a lot actually, because logistics is very important, but at the same time, maybe you don't know anything about combat as such, and therefore, and maybe you neither studied it from a diachronical perspective and how this evolved and why, etc. And if you don't do that, if you don't compare, if you look at everything, it will always be very flattened, right? And that's why you need to expand, because it's as if you had multiple vectors, multiple standpoints that give you a greater dimension, a more realistic dimension of what is actually going on, right? And von Clausewitz in this is really genial, and because he had the courage, especially in an historical moment when everybody was obsessed with certainty and positivistic attitudes, a scientific approach applicable to social sciences, that scientific certainty, let's say, approachable to social sciences like war, that said, look, we can't do that. You have to actually look at war in the way it's being fought, and not pretending to draw an abstract theory out of no evidence, right? And this evidence lays only in the wars that have already been fought, which naturally doesn't mean that you can't prepare to wars that have not been fought yet, but at the same time you can do it exactly through the experience that you have matured studying a previous warfare. Okay, so von Clausewitz goes on and says, in this manner, no doubt, nothing more than a limited theory can be obtained, which only suits circumstances such as are presented in history. Like, von Clausewitz admits it. This is limited. It doesn't tell you, like, everything. It doesn't... History is not the history of all the things that might have happened. It's the history of things that actually happened, and we already have a big problem in understanding how they actually happened, right? Which is all what historians do, and they struggle with. But in fact, von Clausewitz starts the following phrase with a but, says, but this incompleteness is unavoidable. This statement, it's freaking powerful, sculpted in your minds. This incompleteness is unavoidable. This is the real deal. This is our life in a nutshell. Incompleteness is unavoidable. Perfection is unattainable. This is the real world, right? And this is not ideal mathematicization of reality. Or better, that could be achievable. This is very important, because von Clausewitz, and I like to stress this, this is not this is not a skeptical reasoning. And this is paradoxical. Even Popper stated these things, actually, in the intended philosophy of science, that paradoxically, we know more, and actual more, like in the sense of we actually know things better through a failure than an achievement. Because the achievement doesn't... present you with the rediscussion of the things that had brought you to that failure, and that give you an actual knowledge that that thing was wrong, because damn, it doesn't work, it didn't work, and you have tested it with your own failure, because you have lost part of your life, part of your energies, part of of your time because of that, right? And so this incompleteness will always be unavoidable. Why? Von Clausewitz writes, because in any case, theory must either have deduced from or have compared with history what it advances with respect to things. Right? So there is no way out of this, because if you do not have evidence from what has already happened in any field, you can't know. Even in classical physics, you need experiments. It can't be just an abstract theory. You need to make it work. And actually, the history of technology of science starts from that, from attempting to make things work, right? And in ways that are, in fact, initially empirical. Theories emerge after practice, always. And theories actually can emerge exclusively if there is being practiced before. That's why that's another thing with that makes you understand that I have this obsession with the history of technology, and stating that, which is actually true, that technology is not invented out of the blue. Like someone, at one point invented, I don't know, the windmill out of nothing. They found out that, the wind over certain objects, making them shift, and you can channel that force with a certain technique into in moving something else, etc. So that's not an invention in the sense that everybody, someone woke up with it. And the same goes for theory as well. Right? Theory is fed by other theory normally, and theory is also the outcome, let's say, of our mental synthesis capacity, after all, that even exists in empirical ways, in the sense that we talk of theory essentially when we started writing books of theory, like manuals and how to do that, but those were written actually for and from by people that already knew how the thing worked, of course, before having written it, right? And that were practitioners by definition. So the same works here with military history, the history of war. You can't pretend to formulate a theory without taking in account taking into account what has already happened on a battlefield or in a strategical theater, etc. And von Clausewitz writes, besides, this incompleteness in every case is more theoretical than real. Now, this is really the statement that bit flips the thing in terms of, pessimism, optimism, because it actually tells something strikingly amazing. Like, that this problem doesn't quite exist, that even when you reason like this, and you actually look at what happens in reality, even if you do not know a lot of things, what has been shown to you is actually most of the times what actually you need to know. This is a problem that, in fact, historians pose themselves too few, in my opinion, and that there is this generic, let's say, widespread academic attitude that I was telling to you about before, that is now doubting about every single damn thing. But more than that, doubting is fine, but arriving to the point of saying, this thing does not exist in the first place, simply because it's not demonstrated. This is probably, absence of evidence is, of course, not evidence of absence. And this is what every historian should know, and by heart, of course, but every kid should know, but since primary school, in my opinion. Like, you can't say that something does not exist in absolute terms just because you haven't proven it true, right? On the other hand, the excess of this attitude can, of course, produce things like conspiracy theories, like, this thing has never been proven, but I think it's true. Well, that's another matter. This doesn't mean that you have to believe in everything just because, it's possible. You also need that concreteness that comes from the knowledge of evidence, and at that point, the point is this, that evidence is incomplete. That's why you can formulate theories that are actually very valid, even if they need to be fully proven at one point, right? And this is true in every field, right? This is not just about history. This is about physics. This is about chemistry, whatever. So very, say, hard sciences are there called, right? That all passes through it. But here the striking thing is, and it is true that we have a huge prejudice towards the technicalities of reality. We think essentially that we have to start from the technicality and then getting to the big, like the broader concept. This is wrong, in my opinion. In my opinion, from a strictly educational point of view, you should teach first the basis, which we obviously already do, regularly, but that I don't think we insist enough, especially historically speaking, because the way history is taught in universities in the world at this point, in the West, let's say this, is fundamentally this: you study, Western standards, in my opinion, are dramatically low, and I'm not saying because the rest of the world is better. On the contrary, that's dramatically worse, but still, I don't think they are satisfactory in general. Our educational systems suck. People are radically ignorant, and there's nothing to do with that. Up to a certain point, that's kind of fine, as long as these people maybe are absorbed into some, working system that, still needs less education, but still these people can be functioning in some way. But with mechanization, digitalization, we will have necessarily to invest an enormous amount of resources in educating people really mentally, right? Because this is what we need from a century now onwards. 1 century ago, theoretical thinking was not required. Just a very tiny portion of the population needed to work with their mind, right? The others needed just muscles and resilience, and that was it, and minimal intellectual commitment. Now it's the other way around, but we are dramatically lagging behind our current level of development. So actually we're risking a lot, because it's like drinking, driving, or maybe making a 4 years old driving a car. He can do that in part. Maybe 4 years old, not, let's say 6 years old, but yeah, he can. But chances are is that it's not going to be very safe. That's how we're managing the world. How probably we'll always manage the world, but now even worse, in the sense that we have much greater potential, even for disaster, and we don't care about this prevention. But the point I was making, which I don't remember now, is that history is taught, yes, in ways like that. Okay, you study, or you learn, or you read at some points a general history. Let's say you want to study medieval history. Well, as far as I've seen in all Western countries, saying that this basic medieval history, classes that are all conceptual, or vague, all bunch of concepts, and that's it. Like, which is nothing what an actual course of basic medieval history should be. And then you pass immediately to the minutiae, right? You study that hyper specialistic thing, that's specific, like in that single year, in that single town, and you forget, and you study, and maybe you fossilize on that for all your life, and then you know nothing else about the whole picture, right? That's literally, of course, with a bit of exaggeration, what historical education is becoming, because really hyper specialization for the sake of it is what is going seriously wrong at this point. A lack of generalists, lack of synthesis capacity, just analysis without synthesis. This is an enormous problem, because what we need as a civilization is the synthesis, right? Because the synthesis arrives later, but you can do a lot of analysis, but if you're not capable of making a synthesis out of it, what the hell do you do it for? And of course, you also need the synthesis to be of a satisfactory scale for an actual theory, because this is what we're talking about in here. This whole thing is about creating a theory that has to work, has to help someone. You can't make someone studying history all his life just for writing a bunch of articles nobody will ever read, because nobody will ever care about. You should maybe invest that thing into building a bit more of a consistent theory, which of course needs also the minutiae, and also needs the detail, also needs the localization and whatever. But at the same time, there should be a greater goal that, in part, we don't seem to be organizing at this point in history. But the striking thing here is that as long as you keep the state of matters, you are concentrated just in the technicalities, ignoring actually massively more important chapters of history that nobody has ever told you about, that you ever never learned. Also, learning by heart a lot of things, that's something we don't do anymore. That's fundamental. I always laugh when people say, history shouldn't be about names, dates, and places. If history is not about names, dates, and places, exactly what are you studying in the first place? Right? How can you have a more elaborate thinking if you don't know those things? Right? And these people, and you say, but you're contradicting yourself, because you were the ones who said that it was about starting, from a bit of a more general level. Yes, but a general level that is actually, general, because it kind of covers extensively the whole picture in all its diversity, which is not like in a let's say an exam of medieval history. You should be able to know, for example, all the various events of the major kingdoms that exist in empires, whatever, that existed at that point. Do you think that medieval history students do that anymore? I don't think we do. I did it in the sense that I did it for myself, but it's not required anymore. So it's obviously at that point it's so general at the limit of rarefaction. What you need here is a conceptualization of history that, of course, cannot enter into the hyper detail, but about a lot of things. I mean, an enormous amount of things, and that must start unavoidably from dates, names, and places. Because if you don't start like that, it's like those people who go study history because they say, I'm not good at maths, therefore I will go study history. If you're not good at maths, you can't understand. If you can't understand history, because it's literally the same thing in certain. The memory, the application, the mental flexibility that maths requires is the same that you need to translate a version of Latin, and you can't study history if you're incapable of doing that, because history requires maths. It's not a when people think that history is a sort of literary or humanistic, history is somewhat a brutal and brutally and violently scientific subject as well, and it must be understood in that way, because otherwise, what do you do study for? That's why actually and legitimately a lot of people study history in in of history are actually studying nothing. And I do agree with that. I'm a historian myself, and I do study in this field, but I don't think objectively that the majority of people who study history at this point actually is useful for society in a way it could be employed in other fields, and they can't do it just because they're kind of wealthy enough to in some part at this point to survive for some year just reading a bunch of books and pretending to know history. But history is actually an extremely serious thing that you must study for all your life to get to a meaningful point, right? And don't think that I consider myself this extremely sophisticated historical thinker. Like, I'm actually not, but I'm struggling pretty hard to put this together into some sort of useful thing. I always feel, well, whatever. Let's not get it into personal matters, but let's say these things have a social. There is a responsibility behind this, and this is what also von Clausewitz would like to make you understand. This is not a mere abstraction. This is not a theory in the sense of an abstraction. He's fighting against any kind of abstraction. He's telling you here that what you need to study is what concretely makes the difference, right? And therefore, history offers you, instead, if you are able to compare and to study in perspective, this incredibly useful amount of evidence that actually all history provides you with, even if you study it kind of badly or kind of lower levels, but that still puts you in the condition of starting to look at things from different perspectives and giving it a more realistic dimension, like since you were in school, right? So in war, it's exactly that, and it's strikingly accurate. Like you could think that if you study military history, it's all very complicated. Every battle, every campaign is essentially something so different that you have to hyper specialize in that field. It's actually not. Like, there are things, and this is what the Clausewitzian theory stresses, that are always the same in that regard, and that you can applicate at that point in terms of military logic to make certain theories work without the need even of an actual evidence in certain regards, right? And that's why I would like to make a video about it, because it's exactly what I'm doing in this specific moment. I began this thesis thinking that I would never find certain evidence because I was concentrated on details, because I was concentrated on technicalities. Then I started to compare a lot of a broader picture. You can call it generalist, and I found out things that not even specialists had found out about this topic. And I'm sure one day I will tell you who I am, and why, if I survive and I will be able to finish this PhD, you will read my stuff. It's more than 1,000 things, and it will change a lot of things, I think, in the history of medieval historiography. I'm not kidding. Like, it can be, it can. I don't think it will be a wreck in the sense, but people will say, well, it's a bit too generalist in part. Well, but it's actually not, because it goes in. It adds a lot to a specific regional context that up to now it's never been seen, and that's because it has a method that I incidentally motivated from Clausewitz in this regard. Because I realized I had to study the theory. I had to study the art of war. I didn't have to study military history. I didn't have to know exactly how long that lance was, or how that specific time place regulated its armored forces, like on the base of a incomplete documents from the local bureaucracy that we know maybe for just one year. For 60 others we don't know, right? We have to look at actual campaigns. We have to look at actual battles. We have to look at numbers of how many troops were employed and where and how, and put this all together, and it emerged something that objectively had never been said. And this can be applicated to many other regional contexts, and I'm sure it will change something. I can't promise you that you will. Also, I will write it in my native language, so I don't know whether I will make. I could translate it, telling the truth, in English, but I think it will be interesting, because at that point maybe you will not get it, but I can tell you from my side, this was amazing, because I discovered something that I had given up as an expectation, that I said, okay, I will not find this thing. It's, too many people have studied this stuff before. They have already studied these battles, these campaigns. Nobody had compared them. And without a comparative perspective, there are certain things you cannot see, and these guys didn't see that for hundreds of years. And that's what the amazing thing is. And of course I'm making it a bit, sensationalistic, but I promise to you that this will be the case, and I promise you that you will not be disappointed about it. But aside from this, this is just my personal exaltations. But I can't. Why do I say this? I don't say it just for me. I don't say it anecdotically, but it's actually about the proof that what von Clausewitz is writing here. Von Clausewitz is saying the same thing, is that if you compare all these events, you don't have to worry about the details, because what you have is already likely, and all the time. He says, actually, in every case this incompleteness in every case is more theoretical than real. And this is freaking true. Because what we got from these battles, from these campaigns, is exactly what we needed to know in a broader picture to put together like a puzzle. And it was a great picture, right? This is an enormous this has been an enormous revelation for me, because these are also thoughts, including von Clausewitz, that for years I had kind of read a bit about, had studied, but until I got to this point, both with the Vom Kriege and both with with the thesis in this specific subject, I hadn't figured out how true and how concrete it is. Right? You think that, for example, if I had done this with just one campaign or one battle, which I did for the master thesis, my idea, and I passed now to the PhD, and the interesting thing is I said, okay, well, that battle, I still saw it as an unicum, right? I still saw it as an exception. Like I say, oh well, that battle is that, and fundamentally, it's its own context. It's something, we need to characterize. At this point, we arrive to the point that everything has to be characterized, that everything is different. You need to spot the differences. Everything is different. Then you see these things in proportion, because you start studying several battles at a time, and you see that these battles are all freaking alike. There is always the attack from the flank, there is always the wings, there is always, I can't get into the details, but it's always the same pattern, repeated all the time. Like over 12, you may say, okay, well, 1 or 2 do not have that, but at the same time, those features maybe are always in the same proportion in this system, and they repeat each other. So that, of course, statistically, every battle is different at that point, and every single historical event is different. But at the same time, underneath this, there is a continuity, there is a common substance, there is a common pattern that explains them. And that's what the military logic is about. And that's why von Clausewitz is telling you here that you don't have to be afraid of the difficulties that you have in a research. You don't have to fear the fact that that little detail is obscure, because we actually don't know. So you have to give also a hierarchy to the importance of subject, which we rarely do if we concentrate only on one thing. You can't have a hierarchy, because you can't have a perspective at that point, because you will be just an isolated monad. So all of this impossibility that led people to formulate positive theories of the art of war on the basis of abstractions are given up, also because they are essentially not taking into account what a deeper historical inquiry is really about. That's why it's so easy to spot also people who do not have that specific who haven't gotten that way, right? We haven't descended in the depths of that historical inquiry. That I can assure you that they are not even so deep as they seem. Like, of course, to the person who doesn't know the sources, who has never done this, but it seems something so complicated, and you must begin. And I can assure you that when you begin is discouraging. Like, there were times, like up to 1 year ago, I said, I need to give up. There was this imposter syndrome, let's say, that every researcher has, because he says, well, I'm not fit to this, I don't know the sources, I don't know what I can, where's the completeness. It is true that you do need actually a pre-orderly pattern to consult. Like you can't start out of nothing. That's why historiography is actually important, because it should provide you with the means to start with even a good classification, say, of the sources, and or accessibility, of course, so the availability of the sources themselves is crucial. There must be an homogenization. There are countries that have done this terrifically. In the UK, they have done it. In the 19th century, the UK, they have done this beautifully. In the German-speaking countries, they've done this beautifully with the Monumenta Germania Historica, that basically collects all the sources from medieval times of the Holy Roman Empire, basically of Germany, what would be today, of course, Germany in the sense of also Austria, Switzerland, and Italy, and other areas. I think of also Czech Republic and parts of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and that's all accessible. That's all open. I for example, I didn't have this luck because I studied things that, well, in part were classified also in there, but I had, for this research, I needed to consult, even, I don't know, because I haven't written completely the bibliography down. I got all the books, but I didn't list them. But I think they are, at this point, surely hundreds of sources and hundreds of studies, and it's enormously complicated, and it also makes you understand how much room there is actually to expand this stuff, right? And that you could, easily. I will never leave enough to cover all this stuff. It's that easy. As I will never be able to. I will be dead before I will finish here my 10,000 history books I have. Not all physically, I must say. I think they are actually more than 10,000, considering the physical ones or on my hard disk. I will be dead. And this is also what these things teach you, that you are just, it takes time, and you don't have time, because you're aging, and you will die, probably sooner than you expect, and you will say, oh, well, you're bringing bad luck in this. Well, I don't know, usually saying it, maybe it should be apotropically interpretable, but I don't care. I mean, I care about the fact that there is an endless pool of information that you can never stop learning from. And the same goes for military history. That's literally how it is. It's not finite. You can't think it's... there's not space for you. This is definitely an encouragement also to anyone who wants to study. Everybody can, and everybody actually already knows things that others do not know, even in these fields, right? Each and every one of you knows more than I do, in relative terms. Of course you can. It's that simple, and it's that simple, aside from those, of course, who know more than me, also in absolute terms. That is plenty of. So let's finish here the paragraph, because I think you understand what the point that we're getting here is, that when you study military history, the actual difficulties of trying to draw a theory of the art of war vanish. Like, it's way more complicated to reason in wargamistic terms with a with a deterministic thinking, to try to make it match with to overlap with reality that is not the case, which just doesn't function because the system is too complicated. You can't simulate it, so you're obliged to narrow it down to a deterministic system, and therefore doesn't function, right? Then this one, that is based on a base that it's based on an evidence that you can't let's say objectify all the times, but that you can make work on the base of other evidence that you have found. So it's also a much more let's say it's also a much more beneficial way of developing your mind, in my opinion, because it doesn't the positive theory of the art of war requires you just to make a great work at the beginning in terms of saying, okay, how do I narrate this down to something? But it's basically you dictating that, and then hoping it works with reality, but it doesn't. This one instead is kind of you start without basis, but you start getting an experience, a sensitiveness to this. You start developing your criticism and your inquiry abilities, and you already start realizing how things work generally, and therefore even if you can't frame every single part of this into that specific pattern, you can that thing works for the majority of the thing. And even if when it doesn't work, you're actually able to spot why it doesn't, which factors are different in that case from the other, and you will realize that that's actually just a corollary. It's a confirmation of what you were knowing before, right? And that's very important, and because that also helps you to actually connect lots of points together without pretending that they all fit to a line, along a line, because reality doesn't work like that. And if you try to apply that to reality, you will fail. So it's really important in my opinion. Then von Clausewitz concludes by stating, one great advantage of this method is that theory cannot lose itself in abstruse disquisitions, subtleties, and chimeras, but must always remain practical. Right? This is the first need of this thing. We do all this not because we want to fall in love with narcissistically with our own theory, because we're so beautiful and so cool and so great, right? But we want something that effectively works, that while others are spending their time mirroring themselves somewhere, you are actually progressing, you're actually doing something better, and you're saying something meaningful which others aren't doing. So that's also why I think we really need to talk about historiography. We really need to feel that the importance of intellectual autonomy, but on the base of an actual substance. Like, we can't think that every choice is equally valid, right? There is this idea that is substantially spreading around. I mean, that fundamentally we all have something meaningful to say. No, most of the times we don't, right? That's the reason why we, for example, I talk at least about things that I kind of know better, and I think that I know them better than the average, but, it's still the average. There is still, as we were saying before, someone way better than I am could explain the single things. But we also need to realize in this sense the importance of a perspective in things. Like, not that, thinking that every field of expertise as a sectorialization, or like every subject as a kind of a universe on its own. For example, I never, even as a medievalist, for example, I don't care actually about the Middle Ages as such. First of all, because the Middle Ages never existed. Secondly, because I don't think you can understand the Middle Ages if you don't understand other things, and vice versa. Like, people cross off, the Middle Ages from history because, according to them, nothing important ever happened in there. Well, those are people that cannot understand contemporary history, cannot understand modern history, nor ancient history. And that's literally how it works. And I'm not kidding. And that's why also von Clausewitz is telling you this, that you need to be concrete about reality and not dogmatic, not sectorial. And believe me, there is a lot of dogmatism, a lot of categorizations that do not fit reality. The more you categorize, the less you and it's very thought-provoking, because also didactically speaking, you do need theories, right? You do need means and ways to frame people in a certain mindset. Like, it's obvious that even certain definitions and terminologies need to be approximated. But the important is the aim. The important is the direction, right? It's well, okay. Let's not make me do examples from which people could recriminate. But let's say that there is a lot of dogmatism about things like that appear just like empty shells, because they are, right? And there is no substance to those theories, but everybody wants to push them because, it just appears to be cool. Many people stop there, and I'm not a pessimist by nature, but not even an optimist, and that's why I like to think that I'm kind of a neutrally objective, in the proper sense of the word. But it seems to me that we're not doing a great job. Like a lot of things are, we are living in the best time in history. Like poverty has been, decimated in the world. We're doing a fantastic job with so many things. But now we need to rebuild something else, because all this came from also, the remolding, the reshaping of many systems we had before. We still have to build another year. We have to open this millennium with the awareness of the need of a sound theory that is oriented towards practicality. You can't have this if you think that everything is just abstract, that you can basically define your own reality on the basis of no evidence. And the paradox is, and this is what von Clausewitz makes you understand, is that the only way you can do this is stopping to speculate, stopping to do these things that are abstruse disquisitions, subtleties, chimeras, right? And many people are engaged in this, right? Just think of what policies has gotten to. We are completely detached from any substantiation of political and social problems in the way they actually are. It's all about ideas, about alleged, models and identities and things that are completely devoid of any base, of any sound base. And you do need to govern a country. You do need to control the world. You do need to even to fight and to make wars. And that's why the Vom Kriege is here for, because it makes you understand that if you want to do something like that, you have to be very careful, but it doesn't mean you don't have to do it. There are people who are claiming even this, and there are dangers, so we have exposed them many times. But this is now, we don't repeat ourselves regarding to the relation between politics and war and the ineliminability of conflictuality among human beings. But there is also reason, and this reason doesn't mean eliminating reason, because this is what we are actually doing with it. And many people are that dumb to proclaim that, instead of widening, acknowledging the wide complexity of reality, they're trying to make it simpler. But there will always be such people, because that's how also we're programmed, in part biologically, in the non-rational part of the story, telling the truth, and we clothe that as rationality, but it's really not. It's really instinctive and very low ones. That in fact, that are the same ones, paradoxically, that while making us aware that we cannot eliminate war from our political landscape, but also we don't have to engage in it for the sake of it. Right? Many people could, for them it's the same. There are people who are just as bloodthirsty, like. Militarism and pacifism cannot exist one without the other, and that's the real problem of this story. And everything that ends in ism is messed up. But now I'm digressing on other issues, and as you know, you can find plenty of this stuff, basically in almost every Vom Kriege video that I made. Alright, so I think for today we stop here. And there is so much to talk about here that it's incredible, but I'm happy that we got together to this point in the Vom Kriege, and we are actually faring, I think, pretty well. We are almost at 1/3 of the wall, right? And I think we will accelerate a little bit, because the next paragraphs are a bit longer than the ones with the very short ones we have seen in the last couple of months, right? So things get a bit more complicated, but also this means that in a single video we can say more about actual things that von Clausewitz says, and getting actually the most important part of and I think that this proportion of, because this is all a kind of an admonishment for readers, for students, like who want to understand the Vom Kriege, that this whole first part is dedicated exactly in setting the grounds of why certain things are wrong and why you can't avoid that, right? Never think that this is the opinion of a person. This is the opinion of a person that vehiculates things as they really are. That is something, believe me, I wouldn't say about any other author, because frankly I don't have that kind of approach. It's not that I personally love von Clausewitz for some personal reason. As far as I know, it could even be, I don't know, antipathetic to me. I don't know about this, but it's really about what he writes that is really amazing, and that it's really right, and you should never underestimate in this regard as such. And take it from me, like I promise you will not be disappointed in this regard, and do it autonomously, right? Read the stuff, read it on their own. I'm doing this just for people, not just to listen to me, but to actually, I prefer you to read the Vom Kriege than listening to me, because I know it's a good investment for the world, and that's why I'm trying to find out some way to share this also in a kind of a more functional way with people who actually understand. I don't know, we will see. So to get a bit more of echo about this stuff. Alright, so we stop it here for now, and I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.